They actually bet on it, wrote it down, the men of Coldridge. In the back of the saloon ledger, a column of names and a column of dates, every one of them wagering on how soon the widow Marta Lund would freeze out, give up, and come crawling down off her mountain before spring. Not one of them put money on the only thing that turned out to be true, that she would outlast the hardest winter the country had ever known entirely alone, and make every last man who'd laughed choke on his own wager come the thaw. Per Lund had died in the cruelest possible season for a man to die, which is to say the very edge of winter. He and Marta had homesteaded a high, hard, beautiful piece of ground up the Coldridge draw. Good summer grass, a cold, clear spring, a stout log house and barn they'd raised with their own 4 hands over 8 years of marriage. And they had been a fine pair, the two of them, hard workers and well-matched, with no children but each other, and the place they were building. Then a late autumn soaking and a chill turned to a lung fever, and Per Lund was dead inside 2 weeks, buried on the rise above the spring just as the first hard snow came down, leaving Marta 34 years old, and altogether alone on a remote mountain homestead, with the whole of a frontier winter bearing down on her. The country took it for granted she could not stay. A woman alone could not winter that high ground, could not cut the wood, and tend the stock, and break the ice, and fight the cold, and the wolves, and the killing loneliness of months, snowed in with no other living soul. Everyone knew it. The only question down in Coldridge was how long she'd hold out before the mountain ran her off. And so, because men in a hard, cold town will make sport of anything, they bet on it. It was Orville Pike who started it, a loud, florid, self-satisfied man who ran the freight office and a good deal of the town's opinion, and who had not, incidentally, long wanted the Lund Spring for his own stock. Pike started the betting pool at the saloon not 3 days after Per was in the ground, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Give the widow till Christmas," he declared, slapping the bar. "She'll be down here begging a roof off some fool before the first real blizzard, and selling that mountain to the first man who'll take it off her hands. $1 says Christmas. Who'll cover later?" And the men laughed and the column filled up. New Year's, Candlemas, first big snow. 1 or 2 cruel souls writing dates that meant they were betting she'd die up there. And they passed the ledger around and laughed warm in the lamplight, while a woman they all knew stood alone on a mountain, digging in for a winter they were certain would break her. Only one man didn't laugh and didn't bet. Sam Dawes, who kept the Coldridge store, listened to the whole performance with his jaw set. And when Pike pushed the ledger at him, he pushed it back. "I don't bet on a neighbor's grave," he said quietly, "nor on a good woman's ruin. You ought to be ashamed, the lot of you." And he walked out into the cold, and the men laughed at him too, and went on with their wagering. Marta heard about the betting pool, the way a person on a mountain hears about anything. Late, and second-hand, when Sam Dawes made the hard ride up the draw before the snow closed it for good, to bring her a few things she'd need, and to tell her, awkwardly, ashamed on his whole sex's behalf, what the men of the town were doing with her name. He'd half expected to find her already broken, already packing. He found her splitting wood. She stopped, the axe in her raw hands, and listened to him tell it. The ledger, the dates, Pike's Christmas wager, the laughing, and Sam Dawes watched something move through Marta Lund's grief-worn face that he would remember for the rest of his life. Not tears, not despair, something harder and finer and a great deal more dangerous to a man's foolish bet. $1 I'm gone by Christmas, she repeated, very quiet. That's Pike's wager, Sam said. I'm sorry, Marta. I told them it was a shameful thing. I brought you what I could, flour, coffee, powder and shot, a side of bacon. I'd bring more, but the trail's near closed. He shifted, miserable, and I'll say it plain, because somebody decent ought to. Nobody'd think the less of you for coming down. It's no shame for a woman alone to winter in town. Per wouldn't have wanted you to die up here proving something to a roomful of fools. Marta Lund looked at the kind man, and then she looked out at the mountain, at the rise where her husband lay, at the stout house they'd built, at the stock in the corral, at the whole hard, beautiful place that was the only thing she had left of 8 good years and a man she'd loved. Per and I built this with our hands, she said. Every log of it. He's buried on that rise looking down at it. If I walk off this mountain and let it go, then everything we were is gone, and those men down there get to be right, get to laugh and collect their dollar and say, "See, told you, a woman alone can't." She set the axe down. I'm not coming down, Sam. Not at Christmas. Not at the thaw. I'll winter this mountain alone if it kills me. And if it doesn't kill me, then come spring, every man who put his name in that ledger is going to have to look me in the eye. She managed something that was almost a smile. Thank you for the supplies, and for not laughing. Now you'd best ride before the trail closes, or we'll both be wintering up here. And that'd set the town's tongues wagging worse than any bet. Sam Dawes rode down off that mountain through the first hard flurries, and the snow closed the draw behind him within the week, and Marta Lund was alone with her winter. It came on like the end of the world. The first true blizzard hit in early December and dumped 4 feet in 2 days, and the cold that followed it was the kind that cracks the timbers of a house in the night with reports like gunshots. A deep, killing, week-on-week cold the old teamers would talk about for 40 years, and Marta Lund met it the only way it can be met, which is 1 hour at a time with her whole body and her whole stubborn will. The work alone would have broken most people. There was wood to be cut and split and hauled endlessly because the cold ate fuel the way a fire eats paper, and the splitting fell entirely to her now, hour upon hour, in weather that froze the sweat in her hair. There was the stock, a milk cow, a few head she meant to keep through to build back the herd, the chickens, the horses, all of them to be fed and watered when the trough froze fast solid twice a day and had to be broken with an axe, and the well near useless. There was snow to be cleared, paths to be kept open, the roof to be swept before its weight could crack the ridgepole, the labor of 3 people and 1 woman to do it in a cold that punished every mistake. She strung a rope. That was the thing that saved her life. More than once, a stout rope run from the corner of the house to the barn door, because in a true whiteout a person can lose the world entirely in the space of 10 steps, can wander blind in a roaring whiteness 20 feet from her own door, and freeze to death within shouting distance of her own fire. Marta had heard the stories. She strung the rope before the worst came, and through 3 great blizzards that winter she crossed to her stock, hand over hand, along that frozen line. The snow flying so thick she could not see the rope she gripped, trusting it to lead her there. and back through a white howling nothing. And it did, every time, because she'd had the sense and the grit to put it up. The wolves came in January, when the deep cold had thinned the game and made them bold and starving. She woke to the stock, screaming one black night, and went out into the cold with her husband's rifle, and found them at the corral, gaunt gray shapes flowing over the snow after her cow and her horses. A lesser prepared woman would have lost everything. Marta did not panic. She'd grown up hard and she knew a rifle. And she set herself in the lee of the barn and fired, steady and unhurried, into the pack. And the noise and the powder flash and the falling of one of their number turned them, and they melted back into the dark. She lost one young heifer that night, dragged off before she could get out. She saved all the rest, and she stood in the frozen dark afterward, shaking, not from fear, but from the cold and the spent fury of it. And she thought of Orville Pike warm in his saloon with his dollar wagered. And she laughed out loud, alone, a wild, hard laugh that the wind took and scattered over the snow. But the cold and the wolves were not the thing that nearly beat her. It was the silence. She had not known, until she lived it, what it was to be that alone for that long. Weeks went by with no sound but the wind and the cracking cold and her own voice talking to the animals, who became, that winter, the only company she had. The dark came at 4 in the afternoon and held till 8 in the morning. 16 hours lamplit black to fill alone, and the loneliness pressed in on her like the cold did, looking for a crack to kill her through. There were nights she wept for purr until she had no more in her. There were nights the silence got so large and so total that she understood fully, and for the first time, how a person could simply lie down in it and let go. The mountain did not care whether she lived. There was no one to see if she quit. She could stop cutting wood, stop breaking ice, stop getting up in the black cold mornings, and no living soul would know until the thaw brought them up to find her. The worst of it came in February, when she took a fall. She slipped on the ice, hauling water, and went down hard on the frozen ground and felt something wrench in her ankle. And, for one white moment of pure terror, she lay there in the cold and could not get up, alone, hurt, miles and feet of snow from any help on earth, and the cold already reaching for her. And in that moment, every reason to give up rose at once. No one would blame you, no one would even know. Just lie still. It's almost easy, it's almost warm. And Marta Lund, lying hurt on the ice with the whole indifferent mountain around her, got angry instead. No, she said aloud, through her teeth, to the cold and the silence and the whole laughing town below. No, not like this. You don't get to be right. And she dragged herself up, inch by furious inch, on an ankle that screamed, hauling herself along that life-saving rope hand over hand to her own door. And she got inside and got the fire built up and bound the ankle and lived. She was laid up days, hobbling, the stock barely tended, rationing herself hard. But she did not stop. She had found, at the very bottom of that winter, the thing that was harder than the cold and meaner than the wolves and stronger than the loneliness. A stubbornness that would sooner die standing than give a single one of those men the satisfaction of being right. She made it on grit and arithmetic. She had rationed from the first, not trusting the winter, and her care saw her through where a less disciplined person would have run short and had to choose between freezing and starving. The flour stretched, The bacon stretched. The coffee ran out in January, and she drank hot water and pretended, and that was the hardest small thing of all, somehow. But she made it. Day by black cold day, she outlasted December and January and the killing heart of February. And when March came in and the cold, finally grudgingly, began to break, Marta Lund was thin and worn to rawhide and very much alive, and so was nearly all of her stock, which through that whole catastrophic winter she had kept fed and watered and defended by the labor of her own 2 hands. Down in Coldridge, that same winter had been the worst in living memory, and it had not spared the men who'd laughed. The great cold killed cattle by the thousand across the open range. Outfits that had been rich in the fall were ruined by spring. The country littered with the carcasses of a vanished industry. Orville Pike himself lost the better part of his stock, and as the thaw began and the count of the winter's dead came in, the men of Coldridge remembered, with a slow and growing unease, the widow they'd bet on, and remembered that no one had heard a word from the Lund Mountains since December, and began, in the guilty way of men who have done a shabby thing, to assume the worst. It was Orville Pike who organized the ride up, and he dressed it up as decency. Though everyone knew he had one eye on collecting the bet and the other on the Lund Spring he'd coveted for years. "We ought to go up and see," he said at the saloon. "Grave now," the laughing all gone out of the room. "Bring the body down, if well, settle the place. It's the Christian thing." And a party of them rode up the Coldridge draw on the first passable day of spring, Sam Dawes among them. Sam, who had worried himself sick all winter and forced his way into the party for fear of what they'd find. Every man of them braced to come upon a frozen homestead and a dead woman and the proof of their own shame. They came up the draw and around the last bend below the Lund place, and they stopped their horses, all of them, and stared. Smoke was rising from the chimney. The paths were swept. The stock stood in the corral, thin but alive near every head of it, chewing the first of the spring hay. The house stood sound, the roof clear, the woodpile low but holding, and there, in the yard, turning at the sound of the horses, stood Marta Lund, gaunt and worn, and weathered to the bone by a winter that had killed strong men and rich men's herds for 50 miles around. Standing on her own 2 feet on her own saved mountain, alive, and looking down at the party of men who'd bet she couldn't, with an expression that did not need one single word. Nobody spoke for a long moment. There was nothing, really, for any of them to say. It was Sam Dawes who broke first, swinging down off his horse, with his face working, crossing the yard to her. "You made it," he said, hoarse. "Marta, you made it. God, we didn't. We were so sure," and he couldn't finish. "I know exactly what you were sure of," Marta said. Her voice was rough from a winter of mostly silence, but it was steady, and it carried, and she looked past Sam to the rest of them, to Orville Pike, sitting his horse at the front, his coveting and his wager, and his certainty all dead in his face. "You wrote it in a book, Mr. Pike. $1 I'd be gone by Christmas. A column of dates for how long the widow'd last before she broke." She walked toward them, thin and unafraid. "Well, it's spring. I'm still here. The place is still here. Near every head of stock is still here, which is more than I hear most of you can say. After the winter, you all just had down where it was easy." She stopped before Pike's horse and looked up at him. "You bet on what a woman couldn't do. Not one of you thought to ask what a woman who'd decided not to lose could stand, so you can take your ledger and your dollar and your offer for my spring that I know is coming, and you can choke on every bit of it. This mountain is mine. I wintered it alone, and I never want to hear one of you laugh about a widow's grit again as long as you live." Orville Pike did not say a word. There was not a word to be said. He turned his horse and rode back down the draw, and the others followed, shamed into a silence that, in the better men among them, slowly turned over the following years into something Marta Lund had earned the hardest way there is: respect, real respect. The kind a hard country grudgingly gives to the one who's outlasted the worst it can do. The story of the widow who wintered the killing winter alone, on grit and a rope line, and a refusal to give a soul the satisfaction, became a thing they told in Coldridge for 2 generations, and they did not tell it as a joke. Sam Dawes stayed behind that day after the others had gone, and helped her with the stock, and did not say much, the way decent, quiet men don't. He'd believed in her when the rest had laughed. He'd worried over her all winter, and there was, between the storekeeper who hadn't bet and the widow who'd won, the slow, respectful beginning of something that took its own good, unhurried time, and is, in the end, a gentler story for another evening. But it was never the point, and Marta would have said so. The point was the rope line in the whiteout, and the wolves in the January dark, and the fall on the February ice, and the long, black, silent nights she'd refused to lie down in. The point was a town full of confident men who'd looked at a grieving woman and seen a sure thing to wager on, and never once imagined that the smallest, most overlooked person in their ledger had inside her something their whole hard winter could not kill. They bet she couldn't last one winter alone. She outlasted the winter, and the wolves, and the silence, and every last man who laughed. And she stood on her own, saved mountain in the spring sun to prove it.